Hi, I'm Sudhi Uppuluri, the Chief Technical Officer at CSEG. This is my conversation with Professor Anna Stefanopoulou. She's the Professor of Mechanical Engineering at University of Michigan and specializes in controls and modeling of internal combustion engine, fuel cells, and batteries. But today's conversation is all about batteries, the expansion, short circuit, and thermal issues. I hope you enjoy the conversation as much as I did. Thank you so much for talking with me, Anna.
Sure.
And I'm glad we are able to catch up on a number of different things. I've been meaning to talk to you for a while, actually, because I follow some of your work on modeling, battery modeling, fuel cell modeling. And so let's start at the top level before we dive into the details of the chemistry and all of that. And talk about lithium and its availability. There are about over 1 billion cars on the road. Do you think there is enough lithium in material to go around to electrify all of the vehicles?
Okay. Yeah, everybody's wondering that. Well, just to highlight work from University of Michigan, actually almost 5 to now, maybe it could be 7 years ago, I don't remember. Anyway, more than 5 years ago, Professor Keolian from the School of Sustainability and the Environment, he did a study together with Ford about how much lithium there is in the crust of Earth and how which one is easy to extract and all that. So I don't think the problem is the existence of it, as long as we can recover some. And I don't remember the details, but I think I remember the conclusion of the paper, which was we shouldn't worry too much about that.
And it should be easily recoverable and available for the needs.
We're doing a lot of work on that. I mean, the Department of Energy is putting a lot of, starting to put a lot of effort and funding, and there are going to be, I believe, a series of opportunities out there to work on the area of not only the recycling and recovering materials, but also the repurposing of the automotive packs.
Yeah.
The point here is that you have, it's almost like a double cyclone or something, right? Because you have the electric vehicles, the electrification of the transportation, but then you obviously should do it at the same time where the grid gets decarbonized,
right?
Because otherwise,
you're essentially moving emissions from a distributor to a central location.
Yes, and you remove the tailpipe emissions from the urban environments, and you push them and potentially, more affluent communities to, rural areas or areas at the boundaries. And so you increase, in fact, inequality in some sense this way. So the way, obviously, to do it is to have energy storage. And so you have at the same time the ramp up that we need to do in both grid and electrification of transportation.
Right.
And the resources to do the scale up is very hard. So if there is not such a huge competition and there is some synergy so that you have a loop that includes the grid as a second life,
yeah,
it would
I've heard that argument before, saying, electric isn't really all that green because you're basically moving emissions from one to another source. But my thought has always been this, which is essentially what you're doing is you're centralizing the emissions into one location. So yes, the emissions are being moved to the power plant.
That's right.
But then it becomes easy to upgrade that power plant.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
And you can turn off a power plant and bring another one online very quickly. Comparatively to,
having people buy cars, right?
Exactly.
And yes. No. And also it's not just the fact that regulatory in some sense also you can do that. You can plan it better and work out the funding structure for doing that.
Yeah.
At the same time, it's also easier technologically because it's a source of CO2 that it's at higher concentration, so you can do sequestration.
Yeah.
And other methods that you can clean up. Of course, all the I'm not an expert in that area, but
plus weight and cost is not an issue. like for the cars,
weight.
you're looking at, every time you look at waste heat recovery, does it make sense? How much does it weigh? Does it package? If it's a power plant, you can put large slabs of iron.
We actually did do a project with EPA and with industry, industrial partner, to even understand what it would take to store the emissions from the vehicle and remove the CO2.
Okay.
But
is it carbon sequestration, like actually removing it from?
It's so it's more storing it and addressing the input, so that what comes out of the tailpipe is again at very high concentration of CO2, and it's not diluted with nitrogen, because that's when it's very hard to, you need a huge amount of storage and a lot of energy to compress it and put it on, the cylinders you're going to carry with.
Majority of the batteries now are lithium something. Are we stuck with lithium for a while?
Just give me any metal and I can come up with. Yes, I mean lithium. We know how to do it, and there is obviously a lot of activity in doing the beyond lithium and discovering the new opportunities, especially sodium. But I think there is huge opportunity to also do a lot of improvements in lithium-ion batteries. So I could see myself and a lot of large community around, many areas that used to be in the internal combustion engines, for example, working a lot in the area of improving the lithium-ion batteries. So the basic chemistry and improving the system, improving the infrastructure, improving, the informatics, everything that is around it and can support it and make it useful and make it affordable and safer.
That's a huge disruption in terms of skill set and know-how.
You're telling me about it, yes.
Those of us who've been studying internal combustion engines and combustion processes and all of that are now more looking at material science, chemistry.
Right. I mean, thermal, and, you are obviously, an expert in that area. Thermal management is still a big issue. In batteries, their temperature is lower. They are like humans. They like cool, warm temperature.
Right.
And so because the temperature is lower and closer to atmospheric temperature, then it's actually harder to cool them in a sense. It takes more energy, more surface. So the thermal management is still an issue.
Right.
And it can be a large engineering advances that we can have in that area that can increase this way the range and still maintain, all the good things that we are expecting to have, including fast charging.
Right.
So that ideally, imagine the situation. Right now, what we do is we are just making electric cars that mimic internal combustion engine cars.
Right.
You want the same range, you want the same style. Well, frankly, there's no need for that. If you had a small pack, you could reduce the cost, you can charge fast.
Also performance.
Everywhere.
I see some of Tesla or electric vehicle ads going 0 to 60 in 2.6 seconds or something. And I think to myself, some of these metrics of fast acceleration and getting to 60 and 100 are in some ways relics of the muscle car era when people really wanted the power, and people who are buying electric vehicles today aren't buying electric vehicles because they want a faster 0 to 60. They are more climate change and CO2 conscious, and they don't care about 0 to 60. They rather care about how much range can I get in this battery and how much can I extend it.
It's true, but we're going to have for decades, we're going to be driving among other vehicles that they are internal combustion. And believe me, when I drive my scooter and it cannot go above 40 miles per hour and I cannot accelerate, it is dangerous being on the street. So you still need the acceleration to just get you out of harm sometimes. The good drivers, in fact, sometimes we accelerate instead of brake.
No, that's true.
So, in a sense that we see ahead what's happening and change lanes and things like that. So at the end, I think it's going to be more decades ahead of us that we will follow this type of performance metrics that have to do with being on a traffic with other vehicles, rather than the metrics associated about the charging. Why? Because in fact, the people that I think they would start, getting electric vehicles, and I have to say here for the privileged people that they have a car and they have a house that you can do your overnight charging.
And electric vehicle today is not a first vehicle; it's a second vehicle most of the time.
Yes, that's right.
So you have two cars.
Yes, that's right. So I mean, in that regard, if you have a vehicle already that it's internal combustion engine and you plan on replacing it, there's absolutely no reason to go and buy another IC engine vehicle to put it in, your house, your family. Why? Because you don't even need to go to the gas station anymore. That's a trouble to me. Yeah.
And you can charge at home because the distributed infrastructure is already there. It's not there at the capacity at which we need it, but the bare bones skeleton's there.
Yeah, and I live downtown in a little house that doesn't have a garage. So I have to park, compete with my husband who to park on their little driveway.
Right.
And throwing cables over our garden is just not fun. So there are a lot of people that charging infrastructure is still a big challenge.
So today's lithium-ion batteries are primarily lithium and graphite. A lot of it are.
Yeah.
Some silicon. Recently, Tesla talked in their battery day talking about moving into lithium silicon. Where, in your opinion, are batteries headed?
So I'm not a material scientist or electrochemist. I'm a controls person, as you know. So frankly, I'm watching all these trends always with an eye on what is the battery management going to mean for these things.
Right.
So for silicon, I think we all know that silicon and the movement with including some percent of silicon is important because of the higher capacity.
Right.
Managing the swelling and the expansion associated with the silicon is hard. So what would be the right techno-economic equilibrium for that percent is still open. The last year's solicitation by the Department of Energy was actually on increasing the percent in silicon in the anode. But going back to the battery management, the interesting thing, which is actually something that we love to do in my lab, is to measure the expansion of the batteries.
Right.
So we're looking at the actual swelling as the lithium intercalates in the graphite. So in fact, when you give me a little bit of anode that has a little bit of silicon in it, you increase my signal to noise ratio.
Right.
So I can actually measure more the expansion.
Okay.
And I can tell you a lot more about its, of course, state of health. Well, state of charge, but also the state of health.
Okay. So talk to me more about it. So some of the numbers that I remember from reading is that silicon, from a capacity perspective, can hold almost 10 times more lithium ions, but pure silicon would expand 4 times as much if it was just to do by itself. So what type of work are you doing in terms of measuring the expansion, and how does it?
How does it work?
Yes.
Yeah. So what happens is as lithium goes inside the material, then the diatomic structure swells. Right. You just put something in. They call it intercalation.
Yeah.
I call it putting in. So then
it's like a burger. More stuff has come in.
More stuff. You just have to open your mouth more, right? So what we do is we actually measure, as you have a lot of cells in a module. Obviously, that expansion, you can actually, if your module is constrained, then you can actually sense it as an increase in pressure or force at the end of the module. So what we do is we measure that signal. And what happens is materials like graphite, silicon not so much, but still graphite is kind of interesting. It actually, you put more lithium, and then it swells, and then it doesn't, it stops.
And it can still take more lithium?
It can still take more lithium.
Okay.
It's like a plateau.
Does it have to do with like the lattice
That's right.
structure?
It has to do with the lattice structure, and they call them phase transitions.
Okay.
And so you actually see with graphite, you see this pattern. And what we do is we measure, so it's almost like very little observability in between. But if you go around this particular state of charge, then you can actually see that increase in expansion, and that's what could tell you the coulombic efficiency in a sense, and also it can tell you the capacity you have.
Right.
So as your battery might be aging and you might not be able to cycle as much lithium, we can keep track of it
by measuring the pressure of the swelling and knowing
when that pressure changes.
Right. Compared to what the state of charge.
That's right. Well, compared to the coulombs, to the current we drew out of the engine,
right,
or the battery.
Got it.
So we keep track of how many electrons or think about lithium we put in.
Yeah.
And then basically we see when that change in pressure happens. We call it a wrinkle.
Right.
And that wrinkle, it's really like an aging wrinkle. It actually tells you the age of the battery.
I'm assuming it's a smooth curve, as in like it slowly gets and you have a threshold where you say, okay, you've reached this much age, or do you actually measure like a step?
Yeah, we continuously. Oh, there is it's a increase, and then when you actually, depending on the material and how fast you discharge, so the faster you discharge, this discontinuity disappears.
Okay.
Why? Because as you charge fast, some particles inside your the material are small and they charge faster.
Okay.
And some are bigger and charge less. They actually are less full. And so this transition happens in a homogeneous way around the material. So what you see in the entire cell is actually kind of smoothed out.
Okay.
But if you do it in a steady, slow way, like during your charging at home, you can see the signature really clearly. So you can see the slow and then a kind of a bump.
Yeah.
And that bump, you can actually relate it to the age in almost a linear way. And not only a linear way, but actually it can tell you, give you good prognostics about how it will work out, because you can follow it over time, how this bump changed, and you can actually predict how it will evolve.
Is this going to make it to the actual cars?
I sure hope so. I mean, it's hard because you have to put the extra sensor.
Right. Pressure sensor.
Pressure sensor. So,
which are pretty cheap.
Automotive people, when you talk about, even $5.
Right, that's true.
In a module, it's expensive. So we're trying to do it in ways that it will be even cheaper. At the end, it's not. At this point, it's not. It's interesting because a lot of the things we are doing, hoping that will end up in a vehicle. We work at the lab, and we hope that our thing is going to end up in all the vehicles out there.
Right.
But what we find is that it takes obviously a decade, and before it goes to the vehicle, it goes to the industry where they use it to learn more.
Right.
So in our case, this type of technique started through funding through ARPA-E, and then it is used in laboratories, in battery manufacturers, where they put their cells when they produce them. So it's like a quick quality control.
Right.
So now they have these fixtures, and the fixtures always apply a pressure on the cell so that you need the pressure in order to be able to have good diagnostics and not delaminate the cell as it swells and contracts. It can actually age faster if you don't apply a little bit of pressure. So now if you put a little bit of a load sensor, then you can get the extra signal and the extra diagnostics and understanding of what happens deeply in the material, not just with the voltage, but with the mechanical measurement. So it's kind of really cool.
That is, indeed. Clever ways of thinking about...
Pivoting, they call it.
Exactly. You've done a lot of work on electrochemical, electrothermal, and electromechanical, a lot of the modeling work, and I'm very interested in each one of those. I was reading a paper of yours where you talked about modeling internal short circuit. Is that modeling of dendrite formation that causes a short circuit, or can you talk a little bit more about what type of a modeling that is?
We're trying to develop simple models that capture what happens in a battery if there is an internal short.
Okay, got it.
So we're not modeling what would cause or make or how an internal short will evolve. That is a different work, and we collaborate with folks that they do that.
Right.
But again, because I'm a controls person and diagnostics person, what I do is actually develop and collaborate with these folks that they do these models that have the sort, and they have captured how a sort could start and evolve. We actually don't even know.
Right.
So, but working towards understanding.
Right.
But what we do is like when we actually embed a sort and we trigger it, so it's very controllable.
Right.
We want to be able to detect it
before things go out of hand.
Yes. So what we are doing is we're trying to develop a mixture of physics-based and the data, the signals that we will be measuring when such a thing is happening, so that you quickly know that this is happening and you take action. So again, this is where the mechanical measurement comes in at hand.
Got it.
When you measure the voltage, you don't see anything.
So that's surprising. I thought that you would see a signal in the voltage.
You would see a little blip.
Okay.
It goes down a little bit.
Yeah.
But remember, when you have a short, is in between a particular layer. But think about how many layers are inside the cell.
Right.
So what happens, this layer, depending on the temperature that increases and the material around it and how big is the short, it can actually melt and fuse, and then it can propagate, and it propagates. But what happens is the cells next to it, because they are in parallel connection, can support the electric signal.
Right.
So in voltage, you don't see much.
That's right.
Right? It's in parallel.
Yeah, that's right.
The other cells are supporting the voltage. They're taking more load, and that's why the fault propagates. But when it comes to an electric signal, you don't see it till it actually starts really collapsing internally, and then the voltage tanks, and then you see it.
Right. What is the time frame from a short happening to something catastrophic?
So it depends on the dimensions of the sort,
right,
and the point-to-point location that it happens. So obviously the ones that we know they happen are the ones from the anode to the cathode, but sometimes actually sorts are happening at the borders.
Okay.
And they're happening from the current collector to an electrode.
Right.
So it depends where the sort happens.
Okay.
So that's the other part that we're trying to understand, because the electric signature, again, does not let you see this. And you say, well, do you actually need all these details? I just need a sort and then stop or something, right?
So it could be that there's plenty of time where, just like we have check engine light come on, there could be a check battery, take your car to the dealership, you take it, they're able to figure out which cells are short it, pull them out, put the other ones in before things. You think we have that much time? Few days, few weeks of operation for like the type of shorts we see today?
So a lot of packs out there have cells that have sorted and vented. And you don't know.
Right. That's dangerous. Because I drive an EV and I don't know.
Well, if the pack is designed well, venting is even venting is part of the pack design.
Okay.
Because we have vent channels that they actually, they actually vent the channels of the vents. So you could be safe, and if you have you mentioned, I don't know what vehicle you have, but
Chevy Volt.
Well, so you have a lot of cells in there that they can support the others, and therefore you can still keep on going. Nevertheless, you also have the telematics, depending on what agreement you have, that probably you will have a check engine light, and then
I haven't seen anything come on yet.
And then depending on how many act up, then you might need to replace, or you might but these things are not supposed to happen, and if they happen in one or two, it's not catastrophic, and it's not explosion, it's not a fire. So what we are doing is we're trying to understand which ones are the ones that will evolve in an event, and a fire or an explosion. Right. So that's why we're looking at the mechanical also, and the electrical.
Right. How many of the is venting a common safety feature today in the electric vehicle? So that should be, but it's not.
Most cells have vents.
Okay.
Yes, because it's part of their safety mechanism. Whenever there is evolution and a buildup of gas, it's better to obviously vent that, since if you have a cylindrical cell, you have a steel can, and that holds a lot of pressure.
Right.
So you can, keep on boiling, and then you have combustion. You actually have an explosion.
Right.
And the ejectile can be very damaging.
Right.
Moreover, it can actually itself, the ejectile can actually do the damage in a sense that it can, the hot matter can actually ignite, start the fire in other cells.
Right.
So we don't want it to happen. So we want most cells, when they have gas evolution beyond a pressure, a critical pressure, to really vent.
Right.
That releases the electrolyte. It actually slows down the process. You can see clearly a different slope in the evolution of the temperature of the heat built up in the cell after it vents.
Oh, okay. Got it.
And then the point that we're trying to understand is with a combination also of chemical sensors like CO2 sensors, because when it vents, it actually expels CO2.
Okay.
Beyond at levels beyond the CO2 of the atmosphere, obviously. Right. We can measure that, and then we know also, depending on how much of CO2 we measure, what is the propensity for that cell, the particular cell that vented, to continue evolving later on.
Got it. As in, does it need replacement, or can it still keep going?
Be safe, and you can just have some faulty cells, and that's fine.
Right. Got it.
Yeah.
So the thermal part now.
Yeah.
I saw you had worked on energy conscious warm up of lithium ion cells.
Oh, right. I
think that was like a few years ago.
You studied a lot.
Well, I'm in thermal, so
you're right,
when you
saw that,
I saw and I was like, I should talk to her about it.
Okay, yeah.
Is that because that's a big deal for EVs today? When bringing the battery up to temperature so that it could charge properly and operate properly.
Exactly.
And one of the 5 cycles of the EPA 5 cycle is a -7. So it's a cold start, like an extreme cold CO cycle. So is it applicable to those type of drive cycles? And how big of energy savings could that be?
Yeah, I mean, there are many things. There's energy saving. I mean, obviously, if it's very cold, all the manufacturers right now say plug in, because when you plug in, you keep your battery happy and at good temperature.
Mm-hmm.
But you know that you trickle heat it.
Yeah.
And in some sense, at the end, that is not efficient, because when you trickle heat it, all this heat is going to go away and dissipate.
Right.
So it's actually better thermodynamically if you find a way to quickly heat something,
right,
because that's when you want to use it.
Right.
But in our batteries, they are huge packs. They have terrible thermal conductivity.
To the outside?
To the outside and to the inside.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, right, that's why you cannot cool them. Well, you cannot heat them easily.
Yeah.
Unless you heat them internally.
Which is how the Chevy Volt does it. It has like plates of coolant.
Yes.
It's like
the cooling is also could be heating element, in a sense.
You know, going back to the hamburger analogy, it's like one plate and then there's a cooling plate and it just stacks. Right.
So you can do that. Of course, to do that, you need to be plugged in. And it will take a while also, especially if you had reached really low temperatures. If you are above 5 degrees Celsius, it's okay.
Okay.
The system, it will be inefficient, and you will see cold temperature efficiency drop, and it will definitely reflect at that cycle. But what I worry more actually in these cases where you are cold and you're trying to do fast charging is these dendrites.
Right.
And the sorts that will evolve. You will not know, in fact, that it's happening, and only when it's now warm and you actually are doing another full charge, it'll start evolving.
So we live in Michigan, and so you and I both park our EVs about half the time on the street.
Yeah.
And what happens on a cold day? Does it say, "I'm sorry, I can't"?
Yeah, it's a problem.
Can you take it? Can you even drive it, or?
Yeah.
But you shouldn't?
No, well, I mean, you can drive it. If it has enough energy in it, you can drive it. In fact, the best way to heat it is to drive it.
Right. Because you
internally create heat.
Right.
The joule heating is the best thing for the battery.
Right.
But if you don't have enough, the problem is when it's cold and you are empty and you want to charge it. That is the problem.
Right.
So that's why what typically happens is and again, I think that's the very interesting part as a, controls kind of systems engineer, working with the electric utilities, at the end, when you and I and everybody will have electric vehicles and we live in a place that it's an old part of the town and the grid is not very strong, it's very congested.
Right.
And, when my neighbor up the street plugs in, I can actually feel I can see the lights dimming. And I know, so for this type of neighborhoods, sequencing and doing the charging correctly, we want to delay charging as much as possible.
Right.
So when you come at home, you don't want to plug in, obviously, because that's when everybody needs a lot of electricity, the 6 o'clock type of to 7, high demand.
Right.
So you want to defer your charging. Now you defer your charging if it's really cold, and you defer your charging till the morning, then you potentially can get cold.
Right.
And then you can charge.
Right.
So that's the trick. So I want preferential treatment because I park on the street and I want my charging to happen before somebody else that has a garage.
Right.
that his or her car would be a little bit warmer than mine that it's on the street. So it can work out. We just need a lot of information and sensing, and the system can be optimized.
I want to come back and talk about challenges for the public buy-in of the EVs. And I know you've been working with the city of Ann Arbor.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about what your work is?
So I am just a citizen that I live in downtown, as I said, and so I, as a Ann Arbor, townie, I was asked to help and participate in a group. We call it an EV working group.
Okay.
And it's a working group under the Energy Commission.
Okay.
Of the city of Ann Arbor. And what we looked at is how to help and what do we need to do to become more EV friendly, EV responsible. And so we worked for actually 2.5 years in putting together a proposal for an EV ordinance.
Okay.
We call it EV charging ordinance.
Sounds very formal and a big.
Yeah.
That sounds.
Yeah, it was for me that I've never been involved in anything like that. I'm just a technical kind of a lab rat. Understanding how you can have policy and you can work with groups of people and understand, various stakeholders and how they would benefit or not. So what we did is we said the following: the ordinance means that if somebody has a construction,
Mm-hmm.
builds a new building with parking spaces, and there is a regulation about parking availability and
Mm-hmm.
parking spots if you have business, and all kind of rules about the distances and where it is, and of course accessibility and all that.
Right.
So what we did is we attached to these rules the idea that if you are making large construction, and then that's the best time to think about creating your parking spot
Mm-hmm.
EV ready.
Got it.
That means to lay the conduit
Mm-hmm.
as you're digging.
Right.
Anyway, you're digging. Why not to just create a conduit that later on you can put the cables that you need, so that you can put a charger later on when you have the money and the need to put a charger.
Got it. So you're not imposing a certain amperage of cables already laid. You just want the
Phase 2.
Okay.
Phase 2. Right. So that I think phase 2. Okay.
We'll find out.
It's been well, so it has been voted and unanimously, because it makes sense economically.
Right.
If you're a business, then you want to think about offering it as a perk to your customers to be able to come to your business to shop and access your EV charger and be able to charge their vehicles. It also, we would think it acts as a perk if you have an apartment complex for your, a rental, to think about it like this.
Right.
I want to say I also participated in the University of Michigan President's Carbon Neutrality Commission,
Mm-hmm.
where we looked at where and how many EVs we should be putting and the kind of rollout we should be having for EV chargers for the staff and faculty when we all come back again. And we would try to use EVs because if you travel for more than 20 miles a day, you can actually pay the extra cost of a expensive car, but you get it from the cost for the fuel cost.
That was my conversation with Professor Anna Stefanopoulou. This conversation was part of the Tech Deep Dive interview series that I'm doing, where we have nuanced conversations with experts about emerging automotive technologies. I hope you enjoyed this conversation, as much as I did. If you like this conversation, click subscribe so you won't miss any of the future interviews.